This is Java. It's an island located in Southeast Asia that's a part of the Indonesian archipelago, and it's only the 5th largest island of Indonesia, the country. 4 of Indonesia's islands are larger than Java, and yet Java has tens of millions more people than all 4 of those other islands combined. In fact, Java is only the 13th largest island worldwide, but with its enormous population exceeding 148 million people, Java is also by far the world's most heavily populated island, dramatically beating out all 12 of those bigger islands in front of it, like Honshu in Japan, that even includes Tokyo, Earth's biggest city, and Great Britain in the United Kingdom. But what's perhaps the most insane fact to try and wrap your mind around is that Java, which is only the world's 13th largest island, has a higher population than Russia, the world's largest country. Java has 148 million people, while Russia has only 146 million people. And this is despite the fact that Java is approximately 123 times smaller than Russia is in terms of land. To put it another way, Java is located very close by to Australia, an entire continent in its own right, and yet Java has well over 5.5 times the entire Australian population. If it were its own independent country, this medium-sized island all on its own would be the world's 9th most populous. And because it's so small, this makes Java one of the most densely populated places on the planet. The biggest city on the island and the capital of Indonesia for now, Jakarta, contains the 2nd highest metropolitan population of any city in the world, at over 33 million people, barely behind the number 1 spot of Tokyo over on the world's 2nd most populated island. All of this adds together to beg one of the biggest and most fascinating questions of modern 21st century human civilization, at least in my opinion. Why and how does this relatively small island have so many freaking people on it? There are many explanations, but let's begin first with what is essentially both Java and Indonesia's greatest civilizational strength and also greatest weakness: volcanoes. You see, Indonesia is by far the most volcanically active country in the world, with 74 different volcanoes that have been recently active over the past 200 years, and with over 1,000 cumulative eruptions happening within historical times. The next 2 most volcanically active countries in the world, the United States and Japan, each have had only 63 and 62 active volcanoes over the past 2 centuries in comparison. And in Indonesia's case, many of these 74 active volcanoes have proven to be among the deadliest and most destructive ones in all of human history. The eruptions of Mount Semmelus way back in 1257 and Mount Tambora a bit more recently in 1815 are each believed to be the 2 most powerful volcanic eruptions seen anywhere on our planet since the birth of Christ. The latter 1815 eruption of Tambora was so violent, it resulted in the deaths of tens to hundreds of thousands of people worldwide, and it ejected so much material into the atmosphere, it generated the 2nd coldest year ever seen on record since the 1400s. Then, in 1883, this volcano called Krakatoa exploded with such ferocity, it is believed to have produced the loudest sound to have ever happened in human history, heard nearly 5,000 kilometers away in the island of Rodriguez, near to Madagascar, across the entire Indian Ocean. More than 36,000 people were directly killed in the immediate aftermath of Krakatoa's eruption and the ensuing tsunamis that it caused. Of the 74 active volcanoes that can be found across Indonesia today, 45 of them can be found across just the island of Java alone, in a continuous chain spanning the entire island's length. These volcanoes include ones like Mount Merapi, the most active volcano in the entire Indonesian archipelago that usually erupts around every 2 to 6 years, and has been doing that fairly commonly for around the past 2,000 years. Recently, it erupted in 1994, and again in 2006, and then again in 2010. And each time this volcano erupts today is pretty bad, because one of Java's biggest cities is basically located directly next door to it, right here. Yogyakarta, population 3.5 million people. This major city is only 28 kilometers away from one of the most active volcanoes on planet Earth, and many thousands of people literally live within satellite villages that extend right up the volcano slope itself. This is why the 1930 eruption of Merapi ended up killing more than 1,300 people, and why the most recent 2010 eruption sadly claimed the lives of another 353 people. Over thousands of years, all of these volcanoes across Indonesia have killed hundreds of thousands of people throughout their explosive histories. And that might make it seem like a pretty unattractive place to live and settle a civilization around. But alongside all of the death and destruction, the volcanoes also bring life and opportunities. All of these volcanoes exist here because of what's going on just beneath the surface. It is precisely here, far beneath the island's surface, that the Indo-Australian tectonic plate borders the Sunda plate, and is currently subducting beneath it. This subduction of the Indo-Australian plate's crust beneath the Sunda plate generates magma and forces it to rise up to the surface, which is the geologic process that creates volcanoes. You can easily notice that the boundary of these plates here is effectively an identical match with the arc of volcanoes across the islands of Sumatra, Java, and the many lesser islands extending further to the east. Each of the islands across this arc, including Java, have been completely born out of this ancient and violent volcanic process. Their lands having steadily risen up above the ocean from the continuous accumulation of ash and sediment built up over millions of years worth of constant volcanic eruptions. And while living alongside these volcanoes today presents acutely obvious dangers and risks, it also provides incredible civilizational benefits as well. Whenever they erupt, volcanoes spit out enormous quantities of minerals from deep within the earth in the form of ash. After an eruption, this mineral-rich ash will eventually blanket and settle across the nearby area to the volcano, and deposit those minerals into the soil. This process naturally makes the soil incredibly fertile and productive for agriculture, and with the many volcanoes of Java erupting basically all the time, they essentially continually resupply the island's soil with crucial minerals that act as incredibly potent and natural fertilizer. This is crucial because the process of planting seeds and harvesting crops naturally uses up the available soil, because the minerals within the soil get converted into edible plants. If the soil isn't frequently replaced with newer minerals, the soil gets used up and farming grows more difficult over time. This is exactly why, historically, every early agricultural civilization first popped up around river valleys in the Nile, the Tigris-Euphrates, the Indus-Ganges, and the Yellow Yangtze, because these rivers would periodically flood into their adjacent floodplains and deposit minerals from their mountainous sources that would continuously make the soils there suitable for farming. Volcanoes basically work the same kind of way, continuously generating new opportunities in life through brief but awesome periods of natural destruction. Before the advent of industrial fertilizers in the 19th century, nearly all heavy farming and agriculture took place in high-risk, high-reward locations in either floodplains adjacent to rivers, or, in the cases of places like Indonesia, Japan, or Pompeii in southern Italy, volcanic soil adjacent to active volcanoes. And thus, with an abundant supply of very rich soil that is almost continuously refertilized, with minerals by the many active volcanoes sprouting up from the subduction of the Indo-Australian plate beneath the Sunda plate, Java has always naturally been one of the most ideal locations in the world to produce a ton of food that can feed a ton of people, long before the invention of industrial fertilizer was ever thought of. But rich soil is only a small part of the overall explanation, for Java has many other geographic advantages towards food production as well. For one thing, the subduction of the Indo-Australian plate beneath the Sunda plate that gave birth to Indonesia's string of volcanoes here placed the islands they formed directly within the tropics, very near to the equator, a region of the world that remains almost permanently warm all throughout the entire year, with little, if any, seasonal variation. And further, the island's location in between the larger continental landmasses of Asia in the north and Australia in the south directly exposes them to the seasonal patterns of rainfall brought about by the regional monsoon winds. Therefore, pretty much all of Indonesia's islands retain warm temperatures throughout the entire year and receive heavy amounts of rainfall throughout the entire year as well. And Java is no exception. Overall, these factors converge to mean that Java not only has rich and fertile volcanic soil, but also a large, constant supply of fresh water through heavy rainfall and constantly warm temperatures all year round. The three perfect conditions required for massive food production through agriculture, and specifically rice production, which is the true source of Java's incredible population size. You see, rice contains many advantages for a growth-based civilization that other staple food crops do not, primarily because it contains a vastly higher concentration of energy. 1 acre of rice crops on a farm is capable of producing 11 million calories, compared to a measly 4 million calories for the same acre if its land were allocated instead to wheat. Therefore, 1 acre of rice can provide nearly the same amount of calories for a population as 3 acres of wheat can. And civilizations that grow rice can therefore sustain higher amounts of people on less available land than civilizations that grow wheat. But not everyone can just switch over to growing rice, because in order to successfully grow rice in any kind of large quantity, you need 4 vital things: warm temperatures, a ton of water, fertile soils, and a large pool of available labor. When using traditional methods of agriculture like your own bare hands, rice is considered the absolute most labor-intensive of all staple crops to harvest. According to the Food and Agriculture Organization, 1 acre of rice takes approximately 198 to 395 man-hours to harvest by hand without the use of any industrialized machines, compared to only 23 hours per acre of wheat. This means that under traditional, pre-industrial methods, rice naturally requires a significantly larger labor pool of workers to harvest than wheat does, which naturally encourages larger populations and families of farmers. Which is fine, because rice can sustain nearly 3 times as many people per acre as wheat can. Ultimately, you can quickly see how rice farming naturally encourages this sort of feedback loop, where the more acres are dedicated to growing it, the more people it can feed, and the more people it requires for labor to continue harvesting it. And Java is one of the greatest locations in the entire world for the specific task of growing rice. Because of rice's harvesting season, it only takes roughly 120 days from the planting of a rice seed to the harvesting of a fully grown rice crop. And since Java has fertile soils, warm temperatures, massive rainfall, and a big population of available labor all throughout the year, every year, the Javanese have been capable of producing 3 crops of rice nearly every year for generations. And this is how the island is capable of supporting a truly massive number of people for its relatively small size. Not many other places in the world possess anywhere near Java's insane amounts of buffs towards food production. While substantially larger, both the islands of Borneo and New Guinea within the same Indonesian archipelago may get similar amounts of rainfall and high temperatures throughout the year as Java, but unlike Java, neither Borneo nor New Guinea contain even a single active volcano. Ordinarily, this would mean that with high amounts of rainfall over millennia, these islands' soils would be getting eroded and weathered away for a very long time. But Borneo and New Guinea soil are each normally protected from this this by their dense and lush coverage of rainforests, in the sense that when plants die, they rapidly decompose and replenish the soils with their nutrients, enabling new plants to grow up in their place. But when humans come in and clear out the rainforests of all their plants to use the underlying land and soil as a farm, that natural cycle of the forest obviously ends up getting broken. And without any volcanoes or significant floodplains present, the soils have no other natural mechanism to replenish their nutrients from the constant rainfall-induced erosion. And that means farming will quickly deplenish the soils. And that is the primary reason why Borneo and New Guinea, despite being a lot larger than Java and being in a geographically similar location, cannot possibly sustain as large of a population. Because, historically, large-scale agriculture on each of them has pretty much been impossible. It's no surprise then that today, Java alone produces about 56% of all of Indonesia's rice, and contains more than half of Indonesia's entire population, despite making up less than 7% of Indonesia's total land area. As Indonesian civilization and culture began increasingly centralizing around Java and the capital city of Jakarta over time, because of all these natural agricultural benefits, it began attracting even more people from across all of the other islands in the archipelago and, indeed, from the rest of the world for economic, cultural, and societal reasons as well. People always travel to wherever they perceive there is greater opportunity. And as Jakarta and Java increasingly became the political and economic center of the archipelago throughout history, more and more people continued coming to it from elsewhere. As technology and agricultural practices improved in the later 19th and 20th centuries, famines decreased, diseases were reduced, industrialized agricultural practices and machines were added to the already crazy natural food growing buffs, and the population of the island consequently skyrocketed. For most of human history, it was pretty much always the Japanese island of Honshu that was humanity's most populous island for a variety of very similar factors to Java. But by the 1980s, Java finally surpassed it for the title of Earth's most populous island, and the gap between them has only widened ever since then. Today, Java contains tens of millions of more people than Honshu does. And unlike Japan, the tremendous growth rate on Java doesn't appear to be stopping anytime soon. Honshu and Japan's population at large peaked back in 2008, and has actually been steadily decreasing every single year since then. Meanwhile, Java still recorded an impressive 11% growth rate during the decade between 2010 and 2020, which is half of the growth rate the island experienced back in the 1960s and 70s, but still impressive. Even though the growth rate on Java is steadily slowing down, it's still large by developed nation standards and certainly higher than Honshu's negative growth rate. This implies that it's almost certain Java will remain humanity's most populated island for a very, very long time. Indonesia is by far the largest country in Southeast Asia and has the fourth largest population in the world after the United States. The history of these islands are among the most fascinating in the world, and they have always played a critical role in global geopolitics going back centuries. These were the islands that Christopher Columbus was seeking for when he accidentally stumbled upon the Americas instead. Their spices, found nowhere else in the world at the time, made the islands of Indonesia some of the most valuable and economically important locations in the world to control, and pulled in the attention of numerous European empires, who each fought bitterly with the others over their domination. One of the smallest of these spice islands was so immensely valuable at the time, it was even traded for the island of Manhattan in New York City back in 1667. At the crossroads of China and the United States in the 21st century, Indonesia's strategic importance will only continue to grow with time. And these islands' rich and fascinating history is told brilliantly in A Brief History of Indonesia, Sultans, Spices, and Tsunamis, the incredible story of Southeast Asia's largest nation. I listened to this story on Audible and found it to be incredibly captivating and engaging. Since you just finished watching an entire video about Indonesia,